Montana Territory, June 1878. The train hissed to a stop under the blistering noon sun, steam curling up into the summer heat as the wind dragged dust across the wooden platform of Clinton Station. No one got off, but a group of men in deputy coats hauled a woman out the back of the last car. Her wrists were bound in iron cuffs, her face bruised, but her chin stayed lifted, eyes fixed on the open stretch of prairie like she could run if her legs were not shackled too. Tobias Sutton stood in the shadow of the feed store, arms crossed, watching every move. He had not meant to be here. He had only come in for nails and a sack of flour. But when he saw them drag her down, chains clanking like they were proud of it, something in him shifted. The kind of shift that had cost him a bullet in the shoulder back in Dodge 3 years ago and earned him a scar he never regretted. "Is this really necessary?" he asked, stepping forward, boots hitting the boards with steady weight. "She's a prisoner," one of the deputies barked. "Run with stage robbers out of Helena. Orders are to hold her till the marshal gets here." Tobias looked at her then. Not the chains, not the dirt, just her. She met his eyes like she was daring him to care. "What's your name?" he asked her directly. She hesitated, then said, "Olive Deering." Her voice was rough, dry, but it held something fierce, like she would rather bite through her own tongue than ask for help. "Well, Olive," Tobias said, tipping his hat back, "no one deserves to be chained like a dog." The deputies laughed like he was a fool, but Tobias did not flinch. He looked at the lock on the cuffs, then at the chain looped through the hitching post. It was not law he saw, it was cruelty. "If she's a criminal, let her stand trial," he said. "But this," he pointed to the chains, "this is not justice. It's just easy." One of the deputies stepped forward. "You best move on, Cowboy. This ain't your business." Tobias took another step closer. "It is now." Before the man could draw, Tobias struck. A clean punch to the jaw dropped the deputy to the platform. The others reached for their pistols, but Tobias was faster. He drew his revolver and shot the chain clean through. The sound cracked through the heat like lightning. Olive stared at the broken chain, then at him, stunned. "Can you ride?" he asked her. "Yes," she breathed. He grabbed her elbow, pulled her close, and lifted her up like she weighed nothing at all. His horse, a tall bay named Flint, stood tethered at the rail. Tobias swung up behind her, wrapped one arm around her waist, and kicked his heels. They were gone before the sheriff even got word. They rode hard for an hour, the wind hot and sharp as they crossed the hills. Tobias did not speak, and neither did she. Her body was tense against his, but she did not try to pull away. Finally, as the sun dipped lower, he slowed the horse and turned off the trail, leading them into a narrow ravine where cottonwoods offered cover. He slid from the saddle and helped her down gently. Her wrists were still raw from the cuffs. "I'll get those off," he said, kneeling and working the broken cuffs loose with a small knife and a rock. Took patience, but they finally clattered free. She held her wrists close to her chest, breathing hard. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded once. He pulled a tin of beans and some jerky from his pack, offered them to her, and waited while she ate. She sat on a flat rock, legs curled under her, watching him with the eyes of someone who had learned not to trust too quick. "You want to tell me what really happened?" he asked once she had eaten. "I was never with any stage robbers," she said. "My brother was. I told him to stop. He didn't listen. When they caught him, he said I was in on it, that I rode with them. I didn't. I worked for the railway as a records clerk." Why would he lie? Her jaw tightened. "Because he knew they would hang him. And if they thought I was in on it, maybe they would go easier on him." "Did they?" "They hung him yesterday." Tobias sat back on his heels, quiet. "I did not deserve this," she whispered. But no one cared. No one looked twice. I did. She looked up at him then. Really looked. Why? He shrugged. Because I know what it is to be misjudged. She watched him a long moment. You could have let me rot there. I could have, he said, voice low and steady. But I did not. Everything after that came softer. She leaned back against the tree behind her, and he built a small fire just enough to keep away the night chill. She sat close, and when her shoulder brushed his, she did not move away. They will come after us, she said quietly. I know. You could still walk away. I will not. She looked at him, and something in her chest cracked open. He had risked his name, his freedom for her. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. You are a fool, she said. Maybe. She smiled for the first time, small and tired, but real. He smiled back. But I have a good horse. She laughed, and it sounded like something healing. They rode again at dawn. She sat straighter now, her body no longer tense. He taught her how to hold the reins better, how to lean with the saddle, and she listened with a focus that impressed him. They reached an abandoned line shack by evening, out past the edge of any map. Tobias checked it over, then led her inside. You think we will be safe here? She asked. For now. She nodded, then stepped close to him. I do not know what happens next. He looked down at her, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. We figure it out together. She leaned into his hand. I do not know how to trust someone anymore. Then let me earn it. She reached up, touched his chest where his heart beat steady under his shirt. You already have. And that night, for the first time in months, she slept without fear, curled close to him under a patched blanket, her head on his shoulder, their hands tangled together. Tobias did not sleep much. He watched the door, listened to the wind, and held her like she was something sacred. Neither of them said the word for what was growing between them, but it was there, and it was real. By the third day, the wind had shifted, cooler now as it carried the scent of pine down from the Swan Range. They traveled slow beneath the canopy, the trees dense enough to keep them hidden and the underbrush soft under the hooves. Olive rode ahead sometimes, her back straight, her eyes sharp, learning the rhythm of the trail and trusting it. Tobias watched her from behind, noting how she no longer glanced back like she expected to be hunted. Her hands, once trembling against the reins, held steady now, even when the path narrowed beside a steep drop. At dusk, they came upon a creek so clear you could see the pebbles winking beneath the ripples. Tobias dismounted and led his horse to drink. Olive followed, crouching near the edge with her boots tucked beneath her. She cupped water to her mouth, then wiped her face with both palms. I used to think mountains were lonely, she said, not looking at him. What changed your mind? She ran her fingers through the stream. I realized it wasn't the mountains that were lonely. It was me. He sank to a knee beside her, letting the silence settle long enough to mean something. I was going to head north before all this, she added. There's a town near the border, Bonner. I heard there's mill work up that way. You still want to go? I don't know anymore. She looked over at him, her face half in shadow. I've never had someone ride beside me without expecting something. I'm not expecting anything, Tobias said gently. That's why I don't want you to leave. It was the first time she said it plain. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a tin cup from his saddlebag, filled it from the creek, and handed it to her. They made camp beneath a bluff where wild sage grew thick. Tobias set up a lean-to with oilcloth and broken branches while Olive gathered dry moss for kindling. When the fire started to catch, she sat near it, drawing her knees to her chest. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? She asked. Texas, after the war. I worked cattle and carried a rifle more than a rope. You were a soldier? Briefly, he said. Joined late. Too young at the start, too angry by the end. She reached toward the fire, palms open to its warmth. My father was a carpenter. Built coffins during the war. Said it paid better than fixing church pews. That's a hard way to earn a living. He said it taught him to measure life by days, not years. Tobias added another branch to the fire. Did he live long after? No. Fever took him the year I turned 18. That's when I left Missouri. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. The fire cracked and the night deepened, the stars pushing through the branches overhead. You ever think about settling somewhere? She asked. Sometimes, but I never had a reason to stay. You do now, she said. He turned to her slowly. I'm not asking you to promise anything, she added. Just don't ride off when this is over. He didn't reach for her, didn't say anything soft or certain. Instead, he pulled his coat off and draped it around her shoulders. She looked down at it, then back at him. You always give away your coat? No, he said. Only when I want someone to stay warm. She smiled, and it reached into something buried in both of them. By morning, snow dotted the higher slopes, though none reached the valley yet. They broke camp early and followed the creek toward a canyon Tobias remembered from years ago. It would give them cover and lead close to a trapper's cabin he knew to be empty this time of year. They rode without speaking much, but the silence between them had shifted. It was no longer wary. It was companionable, like the kind that comes from shared labor and quiet understanding. Just before midday, Olive pointed at a ridge above. There's movement. Tobias followed her gaze. 3 riders, still distant but closing. He didn't panic. We'll leave the trail. Come on. They turned uphill, cutting through brush and weaving between boulders until they reached a narrow cut in the rock. The horses labored, but the path held. Once they were deep enough that the riders couldn't follow without dismounting, Tobias slowed to a halt. Olive's cheeks were flushed, her breath high in her chest, but she was calm. Think they're bounty men? She asked. Could be. Or just fools with badges who want to prove something. What do? We wait, let them pass. Then we lose the horses and climb the rest. The cabin's not far, and they won't follow on foot. She nodded, no hesitation. They led the horses under an outcrop, hidden by a curtain of hanging vine maple. Tobias crouched beside her, close enough to feel the heat of her body through their coats. Her hand brushed his knuckles, and her fingers stayed there. Whatever happens, she said quietly, I'm not sorry. For what? For climbing onto your horse. He looked at her then, his eyes darker than the canyon around them. Neither am I. They waited like that, side by side, until the sound of hooves faded. And they kept moving together. The air thinned as they climbed, the path narrowing into shale and pine needles beneath their boots. Tobias led the way, his horse's reins looped over one shoulder. Olive followed without needing to ask where they were headed. Her breath came hard in the thinner air, but she didn't complain. Each step took them deeper into the timberline, the trees older here, their trunks wide and quiet. By late afternoon, they reached the rise where the land leveled again. The cabin sat tucked into a hollow between 2 ridges, its roof sagging but walls still holding. Tobias approached first, easing the door open with the barrel of his rifle. Empty, as he remembered, save for a rusted stove, a cot with its ticking split open, and a tin lantern on a hook by the window. It'll keep the wind off, he said, stepping aside for her. Olive moved past him, running her hand along the windowsill. Doesn't feel like it's seen much company. Only trappers in the cold months. Most don't stay long. She set her satchel down by the hearth and turned to him. We'll need to patch the roof if it rains. We can strip bark and tie it with rawhide. There's birch below the ridge. She nodded, already rolling up her sleeves. I'll find a place to fetch water. There's a spring west of here, maybe a half-mile. I'll walk you there the first time. She didn't argue. They left the horses tethered near a patch of dry grass, then cut across the slope. The ground softened near the spring, and the scent of wet stone filled the air. When they reached the pool, Olive knelt to fill the canteens. Tobias watched the light shift across her face, the way she moved without hesitation now. He crouched beside her. You've been quiet since the canyon. I've been thinking, she said, not looking at him, about what comes next. He waited. I never had much say in where I ended up, always following someone else's trouble. My brother, the railway, that cell. She handed him a full canteen. This is the first time I've gotten to choose. You've earned that. She stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. You ever think about building something? Not just passing through. Sometimes, he said, but I figured I was better at leaving things behind than making them last. She turned to face him fully. You want to try anyway? He didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. The question hung between them like a promise waiting to be spoken. I do, he said quietly. They walked back in silence, but it wasn't heavy. It settled between them like warmth. When they reached the cabin, Olive stacked kindling while Tobias split wood from a fallen limb nearby. She caught his eye once, and he saw the start of something steady there. That night they didn't bother with the cot. They laid their blankets near the stove, the fire low and steady. Olive curled close, her head against his chest, and he rested his hand at the small of her back. She traced a seam in his shirt with her fingertip. You ever miss Texas? She asked. No, nothing left for me there. I never belonged anywhere. Her voice was barely audible. But I think I could hear. With me. With you, she said. He closed his eyes, listening to the fire, to her breath, to the quiet that finally didn't feel like loss. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but the cabin held. And inside, two people who had never been offered much in the way of stillness began to shape a life from it, one choice at a time. By the fourth morning, the light came slow and gold through the smoke-darkened glass, catching in Olive's lashes as she opened her eyes. Tobias had already stoked the stove and laid out a strip of salt pork on a flat stone near the coals. The scent filled the cabin, mingling with the sharp tang of pine sap that clung to his shirt from cutting fresh roof slats at dawn. She pulled on her boots, still damp from yesterday's creek crossing, and moved to the doorway. The chill outside bit through her sleeves, but she stood there anyway, arms folded, watching the wind scatter needles from the spruce above. Tobias stepped beside her, wiping his hands on a cloth. We'll need to seal that back wall before the next rain. I saw rot near the sill. I can help, she said. Give me the draw knife when you're ready. He looked at her hands. The scrapes had faded, and her palms were already toughening from the work. You ever laid shingle before? She shook her head. No, but I watched the millwrights in Bozeman. I remember more than I let on. He handed her the knife without another word. They spent the morning hauling bark and splitting it into strips, laying them in overlapping rows along the cabin's rear wall. Tobias showed her how to wedge the wood into place with a mallet and a stone, and she picked up the rhythm quick. By midday, the patchwork looked clean and tight. He stepped back, brushing sawdust from his sleeve. You've got a good eye, he said. I used to redraw the railway maps when cartographers made errors, she replied. They hated when I found them. He smiled faintly, then tossed a scrap into the fire pit. You're not afraid of work. I'm afraid of waiting, she said, quieter now. Too many years of it. Tobias didn't reply right away. He walked to the woodpile, took up the axe, and split a log clean down the center. Then he looked at her. You're not waiting anymore. That night, a storm rolled in from the south. The wind howled against the shutters, and sleet battered the roof like fists. They sat close beside the stove, a blanket pulled tight around their shoulders. Tobias turned the lantern low, the glass chimney flickering with each gust. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if none of this had happened?" he asked, voice low beneath the storm. Olive ran her thumb along the seam of his sleeve. "I'd still be in a ledger room, cataloging shipments, eating cold bread at my desk. Would you have been content?" "I don't know," she said. "I used to think contentment was the same as safety." She turned to face him. "Now I think it's something quieter, something that doesn't have to be proven." He met her gaze, the firelight catching in his eyes. "You've changed." "So have you." He didn't look away. "I want to stay here if you do. Not just through the winter. Longer." She didn't answer with words, only leaned in and pressed her lips to his, slow and certain. His hand came to the side of her neck, thumb brushing the edge of her jaw, and the kiss deepened, not rushed, but full of the things they hadn't said aloud. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "I want to build something that doesn't vanish when the snow melts. Something that lasts." "We will," he said. "We will." Outside, the storm carried on. But inside, they lay wrapped in wool and each other, the fire steady, the walls holding. And for the first time in a long while, Olive didn't dream of running. In the morning, the world would be white and quiet, and they would rise together to begin again. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. The snow held through the week, and with it came a hush over the land that neither Tobias nor Olive minded. The quiet no longer felt like something to brace against. They filled the days with labor mending a fence beyond the woodline, sealing the cabin's corners with moss and clay, building shelves from the spare planks Tobias had stored behind the lean-to. At night, they read aloud from a weathered volume of psalms left behind by the trapper, their voices low and steady, taking turns by lantern light. On the 7th morning, Tobias returned from checking the horses with a folded letter in hand. The parchment was stiff with frost, the seal broken but familiar. "Found this stuck to the hitch post," he said, offering it to Olive. She took it carefully, eyes scanning the page. "It's from Micah Greeley," she said after a moment. "He was the station manager in Helena. He says the marshals closed the case. They found a confession in the belongings of one of the real bandits, a written account, naming those who took part. My name wasn't on it." Tobias leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "So it's done." "It's done," she echoed, the letter trembling slightly in her hand. He waited, watching her shoulders rise and fall. "I thought I'd feel lighter," she said. "But I just feel settled, like I'd already let it go." "You had to," he said, "long before they gave you permission." She set the letter aside and crossed the room to him slowly. "I'm not looking to go back to any life I had before. I didn't think you were. I want to make one here, with you." His arms went around her, steady and warm. "Then we will." That spring, they cleared a patch of earth near the creek and planted potatoes and beans. Olive built a trellis for squash, her hands rough from the work but sure. Tobias felled a pine and cut beams for a second room, framing it with care. They didn't speak of the past anymore, not out of avoidance, but because it no longer held power over them. They had turned toward something new, and it rooted deeper with each passing day. When June came, they rode into Bonner just once, trading pelts for coffee, flour, and a hand-forged spade. At the mercantile, the shopkeeper glanced at Olive's calloused hands and Tobias's patched coat and asked if they were looking for more land. "We've got what we need," Tobias said simply. Back at the cabin, they added a porch wide enough for 2 chairs. In the evenings, after supper, they sat side by side listening to the creek below and the wind in the aspens. Olive embroidered a new curtain for the window, and Tobias carved her a ladle from juniper, its handle shaped like a feather. One warm night, lightning flickered far off over the mountains, but no rain came. Olive sat with her legs tucked beneath her, Tobias's hand resting on her knee. "You ever think we'd end up like this?" she asked. "I didn't think I'd ever stop moving," he said. "You're the first thing that made me want to stay." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You're the first place I've ever felt safe." In late August, they were married beside the creek, with only the wind and the pine trees as witness. Olive wore a dress she'd sewn from muslin, and Tobias tied a strip of braided leather around her wrist in place of a ring. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. She held his gaze. "I've never been more sure of anything." They kissed with the sun on their backs and the water singing behind them. By the time the first frost came, the second room was finished, and the root cellar stocked. Tobias built a cradle from cedar in the evenings, his hands steady, his expression quiet. Olive spent her mornings at the table, sorting dried herbs and humming low under her breath. In the winter, the baby came, a girl with her mother's eyes and her father's quiet strength. They named her Ruth. Tobias held her by the fire, his voice soft as he told her stories of rivers and horses, long trails and second chances. Olive watched them from the doorway, her heart full in a way she had never thought possible. They stayed through the years, saw the trees grow taller and the porch weather gray. Watched Ruth learn to walk, to speak, to laugh like the creek in spring. And through all of it, through snow and sun and storm, they stayed side by side, two people who had once been lost, now wholly found in each other. Their love didn't come with grand declarations or sudden turns. It came in the way Tobias handed Olive his gloves without asking when the wind picked up. The way Olive laid an extra blanket over his shoulders when he fell asleep in the rocker. In the shared work, the quiet mornings, the knowledge that the past might have shaped them, but it did not own them. And in time, nothing felt borrowed or broken anymore. Just built, just theirs, just home.